Hey everyone, it's Colt. Hope you're doing well. While I'm talking for the first 30 seconds or so, here's a video of my cat being an absolute lunatic last night, attacking her own tail. I never know what to show here while I'm just talking about stuff. So I hope you're all doing well, staying safe, washing your hands, all of that. This video was originally supposed to be out last Friday. I ended up coming down with something. Fortunately, it was mild and I'm pretty much okay at this point. I can at least record and not feel like I'm running out of oxygen, which was happening last week. So anyway, this video is up now. Tomorrow we're going to pick up with CSS. This is the last of the HTML content. We're talking about semantic markup. One thing that I do want to mention is that I am going to continue putting these videos out, but I am changing things a little bit, at least in terms of how I name them. I think naming the videos, Colt's Code Camp Day 7 or Day 20 or whatever, might not be the best idea in terms of making the videos have some broad appeal, or some of these topics like semantic markup might be something that people are interested in who don't need to go through every single video before they get here. So I'm not going to number them anymore in the video title. However, I'm putting them all in a numbered playlist. You'll be able to see all of the videos in order and go through them. The playlist already exists. I'll be adding to it. You can find it on my channel. I'll add in all the videos that are part of this coding camp. I do have some videos that will not be part of this, some more advanced videos, just to keep some of my existing subscribers and students slightly less bored, hopefully. But anything added to the playlist, Colt's Code Camp, will be part of this code camp. All right. Here we go. So today we're talking about semantic markup. There's a bunch of elements. They're all super easy to understand. There's nothing complex, no attributes you need to worry about. So this will be relatively quick to cover these elements, but they include things like article, aside, footer, header, main, nav, section. There are a couple others. The overarching theme here is semantic markup. Semantic markup. What does that term mean? What does it refer to? Well, just in general, the term semantic basically means relating to meaning or having meaning in some way. So when we say semantic markup, we're referring to HTML markup that has some sort of meaning. The actual elements themselves tell you something about the content. And that is a relatively novel idea in HTML. Just a quick tour back in time. I've shown this example a couple times. Space Jam's website, top of the line back in the day, sometime in the 90s. The entire thing is made with tables. So not only do table elements not tell you anything about what the contents are, for example, here we've got a TD. If you were just looking at this markup, we have no idea what this content is. It turns out that it's basically a really complex looking nav bar where we have a link and we've got an image in there. Same thing here, but this entire thing is just a table, which tells you nothing about what it is, and in fact, it kind of leads you in the wrong direction. If you see a table, you expect that there's going to be data, tabular data, columns and rows, something that you would actually put in a table. Just like if you saw an image tag, you would expect there to be an image on the page, or if you saw a heading, you would expect it to be used as a heading. But tables have been used or were used a lot in the past to lay out websites because layout was and still kind of is a pain. So this approach is not semantic in any way. It's really just MacGyvering something together to make a layout. And it happens that tables were used to achieve that. So the next phase of web layout and design involves using lots and lots of divs and just generic containers. Oh geez, you can see my recently viewed items. A giraffe head. Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, I don't know. I might have to edit that out. Just for the record here, so you don't think I'm completely insane, I was not trying to buy a $9,000 giraffe head or a $30,000 collection of taxidermied African animals. I was just doing some research like you do. You just want to see how much does a giraffe cost if you want to buy it. How much does a collection of African taxidermy cost? You just look those things up. Doesn't mean you want to buy them, okay? So I don't want to see any comments about how I'm buying giraffe heads. I'm not quite at that level where I can throw around $10,000 for a dead animal neck to put on my wall. Anyway, on eBay here, if we inspect some of this content, you'll see that there aren't many tables as far as I can tell, but there are a million divs. Div, 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 div. Open some of these up. Let's just pick one. Something like, I don't know, this right here. this container, div, 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 div. It's just generic boxes or generic containers all over the place. It doesn't tell us anything about what the content is. And then if we go one step further, a more recent website, this is Stripe's homepage or their landing page. I really like this, by the way. If we take a look at it, you'll see that, yes, there are still divs all over the place. That's unavoidable in some ways. But we have things like a header element. This indicates the header of the page. We have a footer down at the bottom. That is the footer content. Inside of the header, we actually have a couple different things. We have a nav element. A nav indicates links. So navigation instead of just a div full of links, which is what we would do in the past. And then if we look at the main content, there's actually an element called main. On eBay, that would just be a div. And inside of main, we've got a header. We've got section tags. So here's a section of content. A section is no different than a div. Functionally, it's just a container that doesn't do anything. It's just wrapping content. We can style it in some way. But it means a little bit more than a div. A section means, a section of content, some piece of a larger thing. A div is just generic. And then within each section, we have subsections. So let's see. What do we have here? Here's a section, developers first. And then if we scroll down a bit further, let's take a look at this and just think about how this could be broken up. Well, most likely there's a section for this entire thing, and then a section for always improving, and a section for global scale. I don't know if that's the case, but let's see. Yes, so there's a section here, and then a section for always improving, and a section for global scale. So these are just elements that have a little bit more meaning. They say a little bit about what is inside of them. Instead of generic divs, we can use things like a section, a nav, a main, header, footer, aside, summary, details. I think I skipped one. Did I skip article? Maybe I didn't. Anyway, these are different elements that aren't going to show up as anything. They're not going to render any differently, but they provide some meaning about the content. If we go back to eBay for just a second, and I look at these links up top, it's a nav bar, navigation content, but everything is just inside of a div with a bunch of links. That is just a generic way of storing links or grouping them together. It's how it's been done, or a lot of websites do it. But now that we have a nav element, it makes more sense to use that. A nav is supposed to indicate navigation content, so that is a better use. It's clearer, it's more semantic or meaningful than a generic div. So why does this stuff matter? Well, there's really three main reasons. First of all, I kind of picked one word to summarize it, SEO. But really what we're talking about here, SEO, by the way, is search engine optimization, if you're not familiar. But really, we're talking about computers or code reading your code. Whether that is a crawler from Google or Bing, or somebody is scraping your code, or Google News is looking for news articles across the web and has some sort of crawler to find news articles. Whatever it is, code is reading your code. And if you have more meaningful markup, if you are able to easily indicate these are important navigation links, this is the main article on this page, this is the main content on the page, this is a subsection, this is the footer, this is an aside, that sort of stuff makes it much easier for other code to categorize or parse or just understand what your code is. Imagine some web crawler is coming across each of these pages and is looking for all links that are sort of internal links on this web page. So links that are important for Stripe or eBay links or Space Jam links. One option would be just to find every single link and follow them all. Another option would be to find all the links, but pay special attention to the ones that are listed in a nav element. They are navigation links. They are prioritized because they're sort of the bigger links, the stuff up top that might be more significant. By using more semantic elements, we're able to introduce more meaning to our content. And that leads me to point 2 here, accessibility. Using these semantic elements, these newer elements, like a nav or a footer, a header, article, section, main, that makes a pretty big difference for people who are using screen readers. You're adding meaning to the markup. These screen readers are looking at the elements, right? It's all that they have access to. So if your markup is more meaningful, it's automatically or could be a better experience for somebody using a screen reader. The screen reader can easily figure out where the nav links are instead of just every link on the page, or where the footer is, or where the main section or where the article of content starts on a page. Imagine if you were using a screen reader on a website like this. This is kind of an obnoxious website. SFGate has local news for me, but it has a million ads all over the place. I mean, really obnoxious ads too. These really weird ones down at the bottom. I mean, it's tempting to click on some of them sometimes, but they're everywhere. It would be nice if you're using a screen reader to have your screen reader easily identify where the main content is. Where is the actual article of content or different sections, rather than having to deal with all of this content, all of these ads, or all of these images and the buttons, the comments, the footer, the nav bar. There's a lot of stuff on this page that is not the actual content that most of us are interested in. So by using semantic elements, hopefully we can make that a better experience. And that's actually something I'm going to demo towards the end here. I'm not an expert at using screen readers. It's actually, I guess it's not surprising, but it's pretty complex. Some of these screen readers, so many shortcuts and different keyboard tricks and keys that you need to know in order to make the most of it. I am just fumbling around on it, but I'll give you a quick demo of the difference. And then the third reason to use these elements is for maintainability. If we have divs everywhere, just div, it can be harder for other developers to read the code, or for yourself a couple weeks later to go back and update the footer or the nav bar or some section of content. But if you instead use semantic elements, it's clearer what is what. So really, we're talking about making your code easier to read for computers or other code. That's point one. Making your code easier to read for screen readers, point two. And making your code easier to read for other developers, that is point three. So as I mentioned, these elements are relatively new. They have not been around since the beginning of HTML. If we look at some of them, we've got section, article, nav, header, footer, aside. There are others as well, things like figure, data, time, output, main, progress. I'm just going to go over a couple of them. And the first one is nav. So a nav element represents a section of a page whose purpose is to provide navigation links. So traditionally, this would have been done with a div or just some sort of, pretty much just a div, the generic container. But a nav makes a lot more sense. And I'm going to demonstrate how this actually impacts screen readers. So over here, I've got a relatively long, it's not that bad, but somewhat complicated HTML page that I kind of cobbled together based off of a Wikipedia article on ocelots. So this is what it looks like rendered. And it has a nav bar up top, these links. So there's no styling, but if you remove the styling from most nav bars, they just look like this. Whether they're horizontal or they're a collapsible drawer or something, it's just a bunch of links in a list. So these are links to navigate across Wikipedia. Then there's a million links in the article. Then there's a table of contents. As you can see there, this links within the document. And then we've got a footer down here, which is just a div as well. Everything is a div. So we've got a div around the navigation links. There's a div around the table of contents. There's a div around the footer. And within the footer, we've got some links, just navigation links for things like the privacy policy, contacting Wikipedia, the cookie statement. So no HTML5 semantic elements at this point. So if I open up VoiceOver, which is a utility that comes on a Mac with, Command F5, it should open up.
VoiceOver on Safari, Ocelot window, Ocelot web content has keyboard focus.
Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff you can do with a screen reader. I know almost none of it. But one thing that I can do is open up this page of links where I can quickly navigate all of the links on this page. So every single link, and they're not categorized by, position or nav bar or footer or anything like that. It's just all of the links.
Link, main page, link.
And I can scroll through all of them. So if I wanted to get to the links at the footer, if I wanted to go see the privacy policy, or if there was an important link like a sign in or sign out link or something in the nav bar, there's not an easy way for me to get there. It's kind of a pain. Now, I'm sure there are shortcuts and things that I just know nothing about. But what I do know is that when we add in a nav element, we'll see a significant difference. I'm going to hit the right and left arrows just to show you a couple different windows or panes of content. We've got links,
Headings menu.
headings,
No items in web spots menu.
web spots, which is empty, window spots,
Links
and then we're
menu.
back to links. Okay. When we add in the nav element and some other elements like a footer, we'll see a different window or a different view appear called landmarks, which is not there right now. So I'm going to go add in a nav or two around my navigation content. Alrighty, so a nav, as we've already discussed, represents a section of a page whose purpose is to provide navigation links. So it doesn't have to be a nav bar. It's common to use one in a nav bar, but we can use them for table of contents, menus, footer bars, navigation content there. So I'm going to go up here to my nav bar, which I'll zoom in a bit. It's just this right there. And I'm going to replace that div with a nav, just like that. And then I'll also do it, let's see, we've got our table of contents here, which is this UL, unordered list. I'm going to wrap that whole thing in a nav as well. And put that down below. And then we've got one more situation, one more spot, these footer links right there. So that is right here, UL. So there, I'm going to wrap a nav around that to indicate it's a bunch of links for navigation purposes. So I'm going to open up the screen reader again. I'll refresh my page. Let's see, Command F5, I think.
Voiceover on Safari. Ocelot window. Ocelot web content has keyboard focus.
Okay, so I'm back to the links menu. Nothing seems to have changed. But we'll now have a landmarks menu.
Headings menu. Landmarks menu.
There we go. And it has 3 different navigation landmarks. Now, they're all just labeled as navigation. There are ways of specifying that, this is the header or the main nav bar. This is the table of contents navigation. This is the footer navigation. But already you can see that it provides a lot more meaning, and it can call out, or we are calling out, particular groups of links as navigation element or nav elements.
Navigation.
So if I open one of these,
You are currently in a list.
I'm in a list now. And then there are keys that you use. I think, what is it? Control Option down arrow? Shift down arrow? Oh, geez.
Link.
There we go.
Bullet contents. Bullet featured content. Bullet current events. Bullet random art. Bullet donate to Bullet Wikipedia
Okay.
store.
And then if I quickly want to get to the footer elements, there we go. Anyway, that's about the extent of anything I can do with the screen reader. I have no idea what I'm doing. That took me longer than I would care to admit to figure out. But it does demonstrate that there is a pretty significant difference just by adding in those nav elements. Next up, we have a couple other elements that I'll introduce. The first one is the header element. The header element is another one of those new HTML5, new-ish at least, semantic elements. It represents introductory content, typically a group of introductory or navigational aids. It may contain some heading elements, but also a logo, a search form, etc. So there are a couple of examples I'll highlight. Back here, we've got a header on the Stripe webpage, which is limited basically to this nav bar. But then they also have another header nested inside of their main content. This is the header for the main content. So main is another element that we haven't really seen yet, but it's kind of what it sounds like. It's the main content of the page. So you can have multiple headers on a page, but generally you would nest them inside of other things. So the header for this main or the header for the entire page. On eBay, if there were to be a header, it would be this, probably this entire thing here. You could even have it include this, depending on, well, I guess I would probably limit it to here. But you have a lot of flexibility when you're using these elements. Basically, anything is going to be better than just a bunch of divs, unless you're misusing them, right? You don't want to make a header element represent something that is not actually a header. It would be better to just use a generic element like a div in that case. And then we also have a footer element, which is used to represent a footer. So all sorts of content can go in a footer. It could be links, it could be copyright data, it could be some sort of, disclaimer, generally at the bottom of the page, but you can also have footers within other elements, like a footer for the main content or a footer for an article on the page. So let's add that into this web page, this really lame Wikipedia clone. So the header would really just be this nav bar here, but we would also potentially have other stuff in that header, so it's not just a nav, or it doesn't have to be a nav. So I'll put a header here, but then I would also probably do, I don't know, just to make it clear, I'll add a button or two that just says sign in. Let's just start with that. That would also be probably part of the header. You might have a logo, an image, but whatever the content is, we've now isolated, or we've called it out as a header right there. And then I would make the footer this nav, as well as this stuff here, the edit date, the licensing agreement, registered trademark, all that stuff. I would put that as part of the footer. So that starts right here. They're using a div, at least on Wikipedia they were, so I'm going to replace that with a footer. We shouldn't see any difference. If I refresh, it looks identical. But now we just have a bit more meaning. Next up, we've got the article element. An article does not have to represent a traditional news or, I don't know, blog article. It's really just any self-contained composition. So that often is an article, a blog post, a newspaper article, a Wikipedia article. But as you can see here in this demo, they're using an article element for this weather sort of widget thing, as long as it's a self-contained composition. So you can have multiple articles in a single page or a single document. You could have a page with multiple blog posts. Each post would be a self-contained article. And then within each article, we can have sections. So a section is another one of these newer elements. It represents a standalone section, which basically doesn't have any other more specific element to represent it. Generally, an article is something that can exist on its own. A section is part of a larger thing. So a section on its own may not make a lot of sense or may not make as much sense. So like introduction, if that was all that you had, it wouldn't be a great article. It doesn't make sense as a self-contained piece. We would use a section element. So back over here, I would probably make this entire thing an article, excluding the header and the footer. All of this would be an article. And then we could have subsections. So this could be a section here. That could be a section. I mean, this could be a section. This could be a section. So I won't do that entire thing right now, but we'll just, we'll do the first little bit. So we'll add an article element. And then we're going to wrap all of this content inside of it, all the way down to the footer. So already, just adding in that footer makes this a lot easier for me because I don't have to look for divs and count the opening and closing div tags. I just know, oh, there's a footer. It has meaning, right? I know that the footer is where I want to stop at instead of just divs. So there's article, and then I'll add in a section or two just to show. Let's do a section here. Let's do one further down. How about right here? So this is after that nav, section element, and then this section ends right there. So there's one section. So I would do that for every section in this article. So a couple other ones we'll wrap up with. There's an aside element. It represents a portion of a document whose content is only indirectly related to the main content. So those often are call-out boxes, sidebars, things that are tangentially related, but not part of the main content. And then we've also got the main element, which represents the dominant content of the body. So it is the content that is directly related to or expands upon the central topic of a document, the central functionality of an application. You shouldn't have more than one main element per page, unless you have a hidden one. And it should be unique. The content in a main element should be unique to the document. So things that are repeated across other pages, like a navbar, a footer, a sidebar, copyright stuff, none of that should be included. It should be the core content that is unique to a given document. And within a main, you might have multiple articles, or you might have multiple sections, you might have a whole bunch of stuff within them. But overall, one main element per page. So I would probably just come back here. If we were to use a main, we may not even need an article here, but I would probably do this main around that entire article, which stops all the way down here. Put that in there, and there we go. Now our content is more meaningful. The markup itself, we have things like header, nav, footer, article, main, section, all of that means something. Alrighty, so that's it for today. Semantic markup, just make your markup as meaningful as possible. You'll still have to use lots of divs and spans and generic elements all the time, but when appropriate, use semantic elements. And tomorrow, we are starting off with CSS. It's a very fun topic in my opinion, so hopefully you're looking forward to that. Stay safe, healthy, and sane. I'll see you guys tomorrow.